session jointly organized with the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. The information session is on the contribution of the Chemicals and Waste Conventions to the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This information session has an objective to support national implementation across the biodiversity and chemicals and waste agendas. And we try to do so by bringing together you here today to discuss matters that will be discussed at the CBD COP16, that's the UN Biodiversity Convention, and their Conference of the Parties is meeting in October of this year. And we will focus on matters that are relevant to the Chemicals and Waste Conventions and to national implementation, with the hopes to provide further support to governments who wish to coordinate nationally. We will have opening remarks by Monica Stankiewicz, the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and her remarks will be followed by remarks by Rolf Payet. He's the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. And then we will hear words also from David Cooper, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. We will then follow with a series of presentations on updates and recent progress leading up, related to this work and leading up to COP16. So without further ado, I would like to invite Monica, please, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Manuela, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining this information session on contribution of the Chemicals and Waste Convention to the Biodiversity Plan. It is both a pleasure and honor for me to again co-organize this event together with the BRS Secretariat and CBD Secretariat, all the colleagues. And I'm especially grateful to you colleagues from CBD Secretariat. You must be very busy now in preparing your COP. So we are really grateful you have found time to join us. I'm also pleased to be delivering these welcoming remarks together with Rolf and David, and also that we have Diane from UNEP presenting today on the very important and beneficial process, so-called BURN process, in which we are fully participating. This is the second webinar on this topic we are organizing, and already in this context, I would like also mention you might be aware of the global framework on chemicals that has been recently adopted, and they are undertaking currently quite intensive work to shape the future implementation programs and to operationalize the framework, but also in relation to biodiversity. So as the work proceeds, we would be very happy to also reinforce our agenda by taking on board and having also this framework presented at the appropriate time. But ladies and gentlemen, I would just to reiterate what I have been saying on several occasions, that the Minamata Convention has a very strong commitment to address the environmental crisis in a coherent and efficient manner. This is what our parties are requesting and asking, and inviting also Secretariat to seek such opportunities for efficiency and coherence. Regarding the topic of this webinar, I would like to recall that just recently, last year, our COP of the Minamata Convention recognized that mercury pollution impacts ecosystems as a direct driver and underlying cause of global loss of biodiversity, and that parties through the implementation of the Minamata Convention can significantly contribute to the global efforts to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity. And in the same decision on the Biodiversity, Minamata Convention and Biodiversity Plan, COP included several actions to be implemented following the adoption of the Biodiversity Plan, and with the aim to establish stronger linkages and cooperation at the global level, but importantly to encourage parties and invite other governments and local subnational governments, and as well as relevant organizations and stakeholders to achieve greater synergies and complementarities on national level and in their activities and projects. We are also within Minamata Convention focusing a lot on taking actions to protect health of people in vulnerable situations where they are exposed to mercury. And these are particularly indigenous peoples, local communities, women and children. And during our last COP, the 5th COP, so not so many COPs so far, parties underline the key role indigenous peoples as well as local communities play in the successful implementation of the Minamata Convention. So we can foresee our agenda to be strengthened in relation to having them represented, these groups represented in the Minamata Convention and engaging directly and effectively. What to add, I would maybe close my remarks by saying that I believe that by joining forces, we can be more effective and impactful in our actions and achieve our respective goals and our common goals sooner. And my hope is that the upcoming CBD COP can lay the ground for more systematic and concrete cooperation across biodiversity and chemicals and waste agendas. And with this, I would like to wish you a fruitful event and hand over to you, Manuela. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thanks also for highlighting the importance of joining forces. Rolf, if you're ready, I'd like to invite you now to give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Of course, greetings from Rio, where together with Astrid and Simon and Andrea, we've been briefing the ROLAC Ministers of Environment on the upcoming meetings, especially the meeting on CBD in Cali, the one in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh, and of course the COP in the climate COP in Baku. So good day to you all. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, together with Minamata Convention Secretariat, thank you, Monica, have organized the second information session to provide information to parties for our conventions and to parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity on the work is ongoing under the chemicals and waste agenda and its linkages to biodiversity loss. So David, thank you so much for making time to be with us this morning. As you know, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which aims to catalyze, enable, and galvanize urgent and transformative action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, proposes an integrated and synergistic approach and calls upon all stakeholders, institutions to implement the framework at the national, regional, and global level. As you all know, the framework includes 4 goals and whopping 23 action-oriented targets to be achieved by 2030. Pollution has specifically been addressed in Target 7 and is indeed a key driver of biodiversity loss, and thus hopefully will be our focus during this webinar. However, many, if not all, the other targets under the framework are also highly relevant to the chemicals and waste cluster, such as targets 10, 11, and 14. On the other hand, as mentioned by Monica, the global framework on chemicals that has also been recently established has been tasked with to identify linkages on options for mutual collaboration with the biodiversity framework. This is why we have partnered to produce a joint report that will highlight the contributions and options for mutual cooperation among the chemicals and waste cluster, as well as the biodiversity agenda. As you all know, multilateral environmental agreements have emerged as one of the best ways of institutionalizing intergovernmental cooperation, as well as triggering national action in the environment sector. The Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework therefore presents an excellent instrument to help us join forces in addressing the interlinkages among the 3 planetary crises, which include pollution, as a direct driver of both biodiversity loss and climate change. I'm hoping that our event today will also respond to the call for strengthening integrated approaches with a focus on enhancing cooperation and coordination among the biodiversity climate change, and chemicals and waste clusters. Target 7 of the Global Biodiversity Framework also focuses on reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity and proposes the overall objective to reduce the risks and negative impacts of all types of pollution by 2030. Some very specific and relevant pollutants are listed under this target, such as excess nutrients, pesticides, highly hazardous chemicals, as well as plastics. And as you all know, the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm Conventions have been working in this field and area for a long time, and are indeed very strong instruments in order to address these pollutants and even beyond. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions have established control measures at all steps of the life cycle of chemicals, from production to waste generation, to promote the sound management of chemicals and tackle emissions and releases, with the objective of minimizing as much as possible the negative impacts on health and the environment. Under the 3 conventions, many measures to reduce the releases of harmful chemicals, such as pesticides and industrial chemicals, have also been established. Moreover, extensive guidance on the best practices and standards for the sound management of hazardous chemicals and wastes, including plastic waste and electronic waste, have been developed to prevent pollution and protect human health, biodiversity as well. With all these developments and achievements, there is a clear opportunity for synergistic collaboration in order to achieve the targets under the Global Biodiversity Framework. Moreover, our parties at our last COPs held in May last year requested us to further collaborate and explore ways in which the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions can further contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Hence, we are already working together. The Chemicals and Waste MEAs, the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as our sister conventions, Rio Conventions, the UNCCD, as well as UNFCCC, including the support to the Global Framework on Chemicals, and with the other international organizations through the IOMC. At the upcoming conference of the parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the methodologies for core indicators and other components and complementary indicators will be further discussed. These proposals to include pollution in the program of work, to develop a global action plan on biodiversity and health, and to provide guidance on how parties can address pollution to reduce impact on biodiversity will be considered, and I'm looking forward to the outcomes of those discussions. The Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions stands ready to continue working together with all of you and supporting member states and parties to all the 3 conventions in the implementation of this framework. I hope that you will find this session useful and continue developing and unpacking those activities to increase awareness, but also to ensure that we can also target some financing towards pollution that has an impact on both human health and the environment. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Thanks also for recalling Target 7 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as other targets that are important, and of course, the importance of financing. David, if you're ready, I'd like to invite you, please.
Thanks so much, Manuela, and good day to you all. Good morning from Montreal. I really would like to thank you, Manuela and Monica and Ralph, as well as your colleagues and my colleagues across the various secretariats for organizing this event today. I think, given the massive challenges the world faces to address the triple planetary crisis, it's essential that we all work together. We use all the opportunities to make the best of the synergies that across the chemicals, waste, and biodiversity conventions. And in this respect, I think from our side on the CBD, we very much welcome the decisions of the various conferences of the parties of the chemicals and waste conventions over the last couple of years that have called for this contribution. And I really also want to thank and pay tribute to colleagues in the other secretariats for your efforts also to make this happen and to make this work. As has been mentioned, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, this is an incredibly ambitious plan to reduce and reverse the loss of biodiversity. We know that we have to do that. It's ambitious, but it's also necessary if we're going to have a livable planet in the future. As has been mentioned, Target 7 of that plan specifically focuses on pollution, with some quantitative targets as well, and with perhaps the most ambitious part of that target that Ralph has already mentioned, to reduce pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. But we know that pollution, yes, it's one of the 5 main direct drivers of biodiversity loss as identified by IPBES. But it also affects people's health, people's well-being. Once it's in commodities as contaminants, it affects trade, it affects opportunities for trade and economic growth as well. And we can see around the world, in many cases, very worrying effects of pollution. So we have a number of common objectives to reduce pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity, but also to reduce the impacts and move towards eliminating the impacts on human health. For this, we need, on the biodiversity side, to work very closely with the pesticides and waste conventions. I'd also address your attention to the joint reports that have been prepared by the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm and Minamata Secretariats. As Ralph has just mentioned, there are a number of measures and standards and monitoring obligations that have been developed through the chemicals conventions, and we can make full use of these as we're trying to implement Target 7. So as national focal points across the various conventions work together now, including in developing the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which are currently under development in most countries now. A few countries have already, some 20 countries have already completed that process to update it in line with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but most countries are still in that process. There's a major opportunity for the national focal points to work together. And I mentioned just now, as Ralph did, a number of the tools and measures and approaches that have been developed through the chemicals conventions, but I also encourage those on the chemical side to look at the other features of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It really promotes a whole of government, whole of society approach. Many of the other targets, as Ralph has already mentioned, are relevant. It also has a human rights-based approach and emphasizes the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. It also has a major focus on the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities and others. Monica drew attention to this matter a little while ago. The last 2 targets, Target 22 and 23, focus on these aspects: the importance of involving everyone, the importance that everyone has access to information, and that everyone has access to justice in addressing these challenges, and that we have a gender responsive approach. So we're approaching COP16 with the theme Peace with Nature. Obviously, addressing pollution, addressing waste is a key part of achieving peace with nature. COP16 is being promoted by our hosts in Colombia, by the Minister Susana Muhammad, as the COP for the people, the COP de la gente. We need to ensure that everyone is involved in these endeavors going forward. In a few moments, you'll hear from a number of my colleagues on various other developments that are happening in preparation for COP16 on health, on invasive species, and on monitoring and reporting. I'll leave it there. Once again, thanks to our colleagues, and really thanks to all the national focal points from the various conventions that are participating in this webinar. We need us all to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to have all three of you here. Each of you highlighted a number of important things, including what David just said now, the whole of government and the whole of society approaches that are at the core of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So we will jump in now to have some short presentations. There will be 5 in total. I will start with an introductory presentation, and I'll be followed by 3 members of the CBD Secretariat talking about NBSAPs, implementation of Target 7, and the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. This will be followed by updates from the BRS Secretariat and some of the updates from the Minamata Convention as well. And a last presentation from Diane Clemmy from UNEP talking about practical actions for cooperation among the MEAs. So without further ado, let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second, please. I believe you can see my screen now. I'm just need to put here. Okay. I'll be talking today. It's really an introductory presentation for what's coming next, but also to give everyone a flavor of what matters that are related to chemicals and waste that will be discussed at COP16. It's the agenda for COP16 is very ambitious, as is the Global Biodiversity Framework, of course. So I will only be touching on the tip of the iceberg, highlighting some of the most relevant discussions that are expected. Before I delve into the COP16 itself, just to mention that this is not happening in a vacuum. The COPs to the Minamata Convention and to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions have taken decisions in their respective COPs, by their respective COPs, starting in 2022, when this was even before the global biodiversity was adopted, but already foreseeing that this would be relevant, that the cooperation among the conventions would be relevant and could contribute to the global biodiversity framework. Following the adoption of the GBF in 2023, the 4 COPs took additional decisions to strengthen their support to the GBF and to set out processes to really enhance the contribution of their respective conventions. So recalling this idea that the global biodiversity framework is really a whole of society and the whole of government endeavor with human rights approaches and the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. What the framework offers is an opportunity for everyone to come together towards a single goal or a single vision. And this, in particular for the chemicals and waste conventions and the biodiversity conventions that have been working somewhat in a siloed manner, at least with the chemicals and waste cluster working together and the biodiversity related conventions also working among themselves together. But this offers an opportunity now for these 2 clusters to really interact and work together. Of course, this happens with support from many, many other partners, including UNEP. The global framework on chemicals is also extremely important, and FAO as well as many other partners and organizations. Just a snapshot of the GBF, it contains 23 targets, and these are to be reached by 2030, and it contains 4 major goals that are to be reached by 2050. This all works towards one vision of living in harmony with nature. Rolf and others have already mentioned about Target 7, but that's on pollution, but there are many other targets that are also relevant to the chemicals and waste conventions. Target 7 is extremely ambitious. It aims to reduce pollution risks and the negative impact of pollution from all sources by 2030 to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. I will not read the entire target, but it includes the overall risk from pesticides and highly hazardous chemicals, as well as plastic pollution, of course. So we hope that very soon we will have another major partner that's going to be the Plastic Convention joining the forces as well. Here is a snapshot. It's only indicative. There are many things missing from this slide. Just wanted to give you a flavor of where we are coming from, and where we're going with with the Global Biodiversity Framework and the contribution from the various conventions. Starting from the left, in 2022, the GBF was adopted at the end of the year, and before that, I already mentioned that decisions from the COPs of the Minamata Convention, the BRS conventions, have already indicated their support. Very importantly, since the adoption of the GBF, the parties to the CBD have been updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the NBSAPs, and these are the main vehicle for the implementation of the GBF. They aligned, these NBSAPs already existed for many countries, but for many parties, but they were aligned with the GBF. Now in 2024, the CBD convened meetings of their two subsidiary bodies. These are SBSTA and SBI, one working more on the science side, and another one working on implementation. And many of their recommendations are relevant to the Chemicals and Waste Conventions. COP16, and we will delve more into this, but we'll consider the recommendations from these two subsidiary bodies, including pollution and biodiversity in several elements of these recommendations. And COP16 will carry out a global analysis of the updated NBSAPs, and we'll also consider the adoption of the Biodiversity and Health Global Action Plan. Starting from now, looking forward in 2025, the CBD Secretariat is expected to continue supporting monitoring of the GBF, and it may consider inclusion of additional indicators for the Global Biodiversity Framework targets. That's for the monitoring framework of the GBF. This is pending a COP16 decision. This is directly related to a decision by the Minamata COP at its last meeting, calling for more indicators under Target 7 that are related to highly hazardous chemicals and mercury. On the screen, I will not go through all of these, but you can see that the process continues, and there may be an opportunity for parties to revise their NBSAPs by 2027. We don't know yet how many have included action that could be aligned with the mandates of the Minamata and the BRS conventions in their updated NBSAPs, but we are working with the parties through the national focal points and other partners to see if we can include more of the chemicals and waste action in their revised and updated NBSAPs. And finally, in 2030, there will be a global review of progress and also a negotiation of the post-2030 targets. I will be brief because I would like to give more time for the CBD colleagues and BRS colleagues and UNEP colleagues to present, but just a snapshot of 6 agenda items that will of the COP16 agenda. And again, this will happen in October, the end of second half of October in Cali, Colombia. And on the screen, you have 6 agenda items that might be the most relevant to the chemicals and waste agenda and the MEAs. Progress on the implementation of targets and updating of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. These are the NBSAPs I spoke about, by parties in line with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Sorry, there's a text there is not complete. I will complete this before sharing this presentation. Then there is item 10 on mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. Item 13, cooperation with international organizations and bodies established under other conventions. 16, scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including implications for the programs of work of the convention. 17, mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors. And last but certainly not least, biodiversity and health. That's when the global action plan is expected to be adopted, or at least it will be considered for adoption. We will hear more about this shortly. I will not go into very much detail on my presentation about what's coming next, but I added an annex, and I will share this presentation online on the website of this event. If you have any interest in delving deeper, the following slides contain the recommendations from the two subsidiary body related to the items of COP16 and an indication of where to find these documents, the relevant documents. This is really to help those who wish to coordinate within their parties and countries, within their governments and among their colleagues in preparation for COP16. So with this, I will stop sharing my screen. And we will have time for questions and answers, but before that, I would like to invite Kieran Noonan-Mooney from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity to speak about the revised NBSEPs and the monitoring framework of the GBF. Kieran, please, if you're ready.
Yeah, I am. Great. Thank you very much, Manuela, for that introduction. Let me just get my presentation up, which I hope you can, sorry. I believe you can see my presentation now. So I'm really going to speak a bit about some of the issues that Manuela has already talked about, and I want to just expand a bit on the whole NBSAP process, or the process around national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and then touch quickly on the monitoring framework for the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So as Manuela mentioned, a national biodiversity strategy is really one of the key obligations for parties under the convention. It's actually in the text of the convention under Article 6. And what an NBSAP is meant to do is to really outline how a country intends to respond to the different processes established under the convention. So it's really a blueprint for national action. And then, as was also mentioned, in the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in Section B, it actually quite explicitly says that the GBF, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, is aimed to guide action nationally and to provide a bit of a blueprint for the revision or updating of NBSAPs. So really that kind of sets the overall ground for national action going forward. Then in Decision 15.6, which was a decision that was adopted alongside the GBF, countries committed to revising or updating their NBSAPs by COP16, but they also recognize that process, that NBSAP process, can be quite lengthy, and therefore if countries weren't in a position to update their NBSAPs by COP16, they should at least submit national targets as a standalone submission. In that decision 15.6, it actually, there's an annex, and that annex sets out some of the different elements or issues that should be addressed through these national targets. So first and foremost, national targets should be set, and they need to be aligned with the goals and targets of the Kunming Biodiversity Framework. The submissions should also identify the types of actions that countries are intending to take to reach those targets. And then in addition to that, the parties are asked to provide information on how they're going to go about actually monitoring the implementation of their targets. So it's quite a comprehensive set of information about how a country is intending to respond to the GBF. So this is where we currently stand. So this is looking at targets that have been submitted through the online reporting framework. We've received 67 parties have submitted targets already. Just to note that this map doesn't actually show targets that have been submitted through the NBSAP process. It only shows those that have been submitted through the online reporting tool. Looking specifically at target 7, which I think is perhaps one that's interesting to a lot of people. This is the current snapshot. So we have 62 countries that have submitted 191 targets related to Target 7. So for those countries that have already submitted targets, I think there's an opportunity now for the different national focal points to coordinate and see how they could perhaps best go about implementing the targets that have been set. Whereas for those countries that are perhaps still in the process of setting national targets, there's a good opportunity for developing synergies and cooperation in the formulation of those targets. Just to note, if you'd like to actually go and have a more in-depth look at what information is being submitted through the online reporting tool, you can do that. You just go to the link shown above and you can analyze the information. You can do a bulk export of any of the records that you're interested in. So it's a good opportunity to perhaps be informed of what other countries are doing or what is happening in your own country, and to identify areas for synergies and cooperation. Then just quickly with regards to the monitoring framework for the GBF, and Manuela touched a bit upon this already. So in Decision 15.5, the CBD adopted a monitoring framework that's composed of headline, binary, component, and complementary indicators. And this is really how parties are intending to track and monitor the implementation of the framework. The headline indicators and the binary indicators are a core component of national reporting, so they're a required element of the national reporting, whereas component and complementary indicators are optional. When the monitoring framework was adopted, however, the parties also recognized that there were a number of issues within the framework, the monitoring framework, that needed further elaboration and development. And then for that purpose, they established what we call an ATEG, so an ad hoc technical expert group, to further advise on the development of the monitoring framework, to identify gaps that needed to be addressed, et cetera. So then at this last SUBSTA meeting, the SUBSTA, or the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice, considered the result of the ATEG and proposed a number of updates to it. And those updates were discussed at SUBSTA 26, and that discussion will continue at the next COP meeting. So just for reference, these are the indicators that are currently identified in recommendation 26/1. So as I said, the headline indicators are the ones that parties would be expected to say something about through their national reporting framework, or the national reports rather, and then the component and complementary indicators. And also, I mean, just to note that, as I mentioned, the whole issue of the monitoring framework is still currently under discussion, or will be discussed at COP. So some of this information may change in light of those discussions. So then just quickly, in terms of what's expected at COP, and Manuela spoke about this already somewhat. So there's two items that link to this issue. The first is item 8. And under that item, it's really the first opportunity for parties to take stock of the progress that's been made in developing NBSAPs and in setting targets. So that's going to be a really important period of reflection for the parties over what's happened over the last 2 years since the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted. Just to note that those, just before COP16, there's going to be the 5th meeting of the Subsidiary Body on implementation, and they're actually also going to have a quite in-depth discussion on this issue. And then item 10 is really where the whole mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and reviewing the implementation of the GBF will get discussed. So that includes issues like indicators, but it's broader. It touches on any mechanisms or reports the convention may wish to establish to help further guide the work of the convention. So it's quite a big agenda item. So I mean, just to recap, item 8 is really about taking stock of the progress, and item 10 is about putting in place the mechanisms, or ensuring that the mechanisms are all in place and sorted out to further guide the work of the convention into the future. Thank you very much. I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thank you, Manuela.
Thank you so much, Kieran. I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so I ask you to hang in there, please. And if there are any questions, participants, please feel free to use the chat, and we will make sure to have some minutes at the end, some time at the end for questions and answers. So let me invite now Monica Kobayashi to speak about the implementation of Target 7 of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Please, Monica.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Let me share my presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can, Monica. Please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much to all organizers, dear participants. It's a pleasure to be here today and discuss with you this important subject that is the implementation of the Target 7. All the previous speakers made my life easier, so I will go very quickly through some slides. Today, I would like to propose to start by remind us about the Target 7 and how it fits in the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and then to discuss one item that was already mentioned previous by Manuela by Kira, which touches the pollution topic, and then to end by mentioning how we collaborating with other EMAs and also some future projects that we trying to implement. So, as you may know, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has 4 goals and 23 targets, and the targets are grouped in three subgroups, which is the first, reducing threats, the second, meeting people's needs, and the third is tools and solutions. So Target 7 is in the first group, that is reducing threats. As many previous colleagues already mentioned, the Target 7 is about reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. These include all sources of pollution. But in the text of Target 7, we can highlight some of them, which is the nutrient loss to the environment, the risk of pesticide and highly hazardous chemicals, and also eliminating plastic pollution. And so what we can expect from COP16 regarding pollution? Now we have the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework adopted, and as Kira just presented, countries are working on their national targets and also updating their NAB subs. So all this is to help countries to implement policies and actions in the ground. And in this implementation is very important to work with the whole society, but with key partners that have the expertise to help countries in implementing their targets. So in this, we need coherent actions to address multiple global challenges. When we're working towards achieving the Target 7, we are also working to implement other global commitments like the Global Framework on Chemicals. In COP, this item 16 is about the technical and scientific needs to support implementation. In a nutshell, this agenda item, it reports to COP on the needs. So we did the analysis, a gap analysis, to see all the tools and guidance that we have available now that support the implementation of the framework and to identify gaps. So what the Substa is recommended to COP is that we have many available tools and guidance, and they are very helpful to implement the framework. They also will recommend to COP the urgent need to implement without further delay and prioritize the use of those existing tools and guidance. However, Substa also recognize that there are some areas of work that need improvements. And then there is a short list of priorities that COP will be negotiating to see what kind of topics we will prioritize to give more attention. And pollution is one of these topics. The second sub-item is about the work of IPBES. So COP will be also negotiating some priorities to have future assessments. And one of these topics is pollution and biodiversity. So there is a lot to expect from COP in this regard. In this, is clearly that we need to work together. As many other speakers also mentioned, what we're doing currently, we're working together with Minamata, with BRS, and with other partners to try to help countries in awareness raising, capacity building. We got few small grants that we now setting up some projects in very soon. Hopefully we will be announcing those projects and then inviting parties to participate in these capacity buildings. A part of that, we are also working in many events together. We had the opportunity to have events during Substa, during UNEA 6, and now we are preparing for COP16 inside events, and but also preparing for the Water Day, in which pollution is one component of the day, because it also impacts not only biodiversity, but also human health in economies. So with this, I would like just to say that achieving the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we will also be working for the other goals like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Chemicals Framework, and we need the whole society, whole government approach. And then we need to work together to achieve the goals, and because we live in one planet with harmony with nature. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Monica, for zooming in on target 7 and then linking it to the SDGs and much larger goals. Thank you very much. Let me ask now Marianela Araya, also from the CBD Secretariat, who is going to talk about the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. Marianela, please, and let's please keep the presentation short so that we have some time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Manuela,
Marianela.
let me share my screen. Okay, good day to everyone. Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I'm going to be very briefly sharing with you some information about the action plan on biodiversity and health. Under the CBD, we are developing and the parties are discussing and considering an action plan to mainstream linkages between biodiversity and health. The plan has been previously considered from a technical perspective during the latest Substa meeting, the meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice. And it's now being presented for COP with the option of an adoption of the plan. So just to give you a little bit of context of what this plan is about, and then I'm going to get into more details on how it relates to the Chemical and Waste Conventions. The plan pretty much recognizes that the health of environment and the health of all species are connected and are interdependent. And therefore, it also recognizes that biodiversity underpins nature contributions to people and provide ecosystems, goods, and services that are essential for health and well-being. And it also, of course, notes that there are a number of drivers of change that might affect both biodiversity and health. And it directly responds to Section C of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. You have been listening a lot about all the targets, but Section C is the section that speaks about the considerations for implementation of the framework. And biodiversity and health is one of those key considerations that every country should take into account when they are trying to implement the GBF. So the plan directly responds to that. In terms of the structure of the plan, as I said, is meant to facilitate the mainstreaming of biodiversity and health linkages into national policies, strategies, programs, and accounts. And for that, it proposed a set of voluntary actions. And if those actions are addressed, then what happened is that we will be enabling collaboration and coordination across sectors, because the plan is built in a way that we also recognize the importance of collaboration with other either multilateral environmental agreements, but also with, at the national level with other partners, organizations, and so on. So I mentioned the plan has a set of voluntary actions. So some of those actions are pretty much aligned with the actions of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So you will see that the thematic areas that we cover on the plan are the same areas that are covered on the GBF. So for interest for the chemical and waste conventions, probably as you have heard from other speakers before, there are many targets that can provide entry points for discussions, for discussing the links between biodiversity, health, and pollution. So obviously, target 7 is one of them, but also, for example, target 10, target 11, target 16. So I'm not going to go into detail of all of them. I mean, you can go and have a look at the plan. It is posted on the CBD website, and we can share the link on the chat, and you can see all the actions that we are proposing for those targets. But I'm going to share very briefly just a couple of examples of some of the text that it's part of the plan. So when it comes to target 7, for example, the plan recognizes, in line with the target, of course, that pollution in all its form is harmful to biodiversity and the health of people, and that it has an impact on the ability of biodiversity to contribute to the provision of all those services that we receive, like clean air, water, soil, fertility, pollinators, and so on. And then when it comes to target 10, for example, the plan recognizes that agroecological approaches, for example, can reduce the need of nutrients and pesticides, including those that are harmful to people and pollinators. So pretty much pollution is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and that is pretty much evident in the actions proposed on the Biodiversity and Health Action Plan. So having said that, these are some examples of those entry points or actions that you can see in the plan. For example, it mentions that we should raise awareness of the negative impacts of pollution on both biodiversity and health, that we should have environmentally sound management of waste, including, for example, antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, medical products, heavy metals, waste, and so on. That we should reduce the need and use of pesticides, fertilizers, and other chemical inputs. And we should also identify opportunities to promote healthy and sustainable lifestyles, sustainable consumption patterns, waste reduction, and associated behavioral change. So this is very briefly just some examples of the content of the plan and how it relates to the work that you do from the chemical and waste perspective. I should say, however, before I finalize, I should say that there are some unresolved issues around this plan. As I said, the plan was considered from a technical perspective during SAPSTA. It's now going to be considered at COP, but there are some unresolved issues, some elements, especially around some elements to be captured on some of the actions when it comes to antimicrobials, heavy metals, pollution coming from air, light, and noise pollution, excess nutrients, pesticides, highly hazardous chemicals, plastic. There is still debate on how to refer and where to refer in the plan to some of these elements. So you will see if you look at the plan that some text around this is still bracketed. But there seems to be common understanding about plastics. That's why I put that in green. I think parties recognize the importance of all the others. It's just that there are still discussions on how to refer to them. So probably I mentioned that because it will be an important opportunity for focal points of the BRS and Minamata conventions to discuss with focal points of the CBD before COP. So to conclude, this is my last slide, opportunities for cooperation. I think BRS, Minamata, and CBD all consider the impacts of pollution on various forms, that the impacts that pollution can have on the health of human and the environment. And of course, as we have been saying, the GBF and the Global Biodiversity and Health Action Plan both promote a coordinated approach and cooperation to avoid duplication, maximizing the use of resources. So there's an opportunity for us to work together towards a common goal. And also considering that no single actor can do this alone. This is a cross-cutting topic that even though now is being also discussed under the CBD, it doesn't mean that at the CBD we have the capacity to deal with this alone. We need partners and support from all the other organizations involved on this topic. And finally, close collaboration between the CBD, BRS, and Minamata conventions can support parties of the various conventions in addressing pollution while producing co-benefits for the environment and health. And with this, I'm going to stop here and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Marianela. This was extremely helpful, very important tool for bringing together all these different components that we are talking about and to support the GBF. Thank you very much. So let's move on to our second last presentation. It's updates from the BRS Secretariats. Kay Ono Woodall is stepping in for Agustin Harte, who usually deals with this, but they work together. And I will, following Kay's presentation, I will also share a couple of slides from the Minamata's work, and this will be followed by the UNEP Law Division. Thank you. Please, Kay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share information from the BRS conventions. Yes. Oh, thank you very much already. To move into the last slide, I was going to present initially, as many information has already been highlighted by previous speakers, how Target 7 is so much related to chemicals and waste conventions, and how all member states are looking at us for further cooperation. So it is very clear that pollution causes biodiversity loss. And from that point of view, the Conference of the Parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions also mandated the Secretariats to work concretely towards supporting this Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and also to come up with some other ideas that could further the efforts by member states. So at the last COP that was held in May 2023, they have requested the Secretariat to prepare a report which has recommendations on how the BRS conventions could contribute to the implementation of the framework. And in response, with the generous contribution from the government of Belgium, we are preparing the report together with the CBD Secretariat and the Minamata Secretariat, as well as the Global Framework on Chemicals, who also has a similar mandate. The report will have three key components. One is about identifying the impact of environmentally sound management of chemicals and waste on the biodiversity targets, and also the identification of existing and ongoing efforts. And on the basis of this analysis, the report will develop recommendations for potential further synergies. And this will offer
Hi, Kay, your microphone is muted.
I think I muted myself. I don't know until when I was speaking. But yes, so the recommendation will provide suggestions for enhanced collaboration between the biodiversity and chemicals and waste cluster. Next slide, please. So the three conventions, Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, work already in a synergistic manner to address life cycle of hazardous waste and chemicals. The Stockholm Convention has provisions related to prohibition or restriction of production and use of persistent organic pollutants. Those chemicals all result in biodiversity loss when it is in the environment or close to human exposure. And then the Rotterdam Convention would support the more informed decision-making on trade, international trade. And then the Basel Convention would offer environmentally sound management of hazardous waste, as well as controlling the transboundary movement from one country to another. So with these three conventions, having those provisions certainly will work and have impact on the promoting biodiversity, and that it will have both from pesticides and industrial chemicals, we could work to contribute on Target 7. So the report in preparation is something that you can look forward to and will be reported back at the 2025 BRS COPs in May. If you could also go to the next slide. Yes, as I was saying, so the main interlinkage that you can expect is with the pesticide management. For example, bee pollinators could have impact with a reduced use of pesticides, thanks to the work done in the chemicals and waste cluster multilateral environmental agreements, or through the efforts of global framework on chemicals. And then with regard to industrial chemicals, we could also expect the reduction of endocrine disrupting chemicals or other hazardous chemicals that could affect the biodiversity in the environment. Antimicrobial resistance was also mentioned, and heavy metals also have impact on the biodiversity loss directly. Next slide, please. So we have already developed formally the publication called Interlinkage with the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework. So you could have access to this publication on the BRS website, and we will be working on the next iteration of the report for the 2025 COPs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. I will piggyback on your presentation to talk a little bit about the contribution from the Minamata Convention on Mercury to the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. If I could have the next slide, please, Sharifu. Thank you. Kay already mentioned that the BRS, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, they work very much in synergy, and so it's true also for the Minamata Convention on Mercury with the BRS convention. So we form a cluster that works very closely, in very close collaboration. And now we are expanding these, as we've been discussing, to include also biodiversity related matters. The Minamata Convention has mapped opportunities for generating co-benefits, and this is through coherent implementation. So it's not just a one-way road of the Minamata Convention contributing to the GBF, but also the recognition that the implementation of the GBF will contribute very significantly to the implementation of the Minamata Convention. There are 5 core provisions under the Minamata Convention that are entry points for enhancing these co-benefits. They deal with assessment of impacts of mercury on the environment, assessments of socioeconomic and cultural impacts, particularly in respect to vulnerable populations, artisan and small-scale gold mining, where mercury is used. Excuse me, there is a typo there, I see. That's supposed to be gold mining where mercury is used. There is monitoring for the presence and movement of mercury in the environment and remediation of mercury contaminated sites. Next slide, please. We've mapped, following a request from COP4, we prepared a report where we mapped how the Minamata Convention could contribute to the GBF, and we found entry points in 21 out of the 23 targets of the GBF. That's not to say that it's a direct relationship with the entire target, but there are elements in each of these targets that are relevant and that the Minamata Convention can contribute to. Of course, target 7 is the main one, but there are targets related, for example, that's target 11 related to ecosystem functions and services, namely water and air quality, for example, that are very directly relevant to the work that we do under the Minamata Convention, or targets 22 and 23 that relate to indigenous peoples, local communities, and women, who are also among the most affected populations affected by mercury pollution. Next slide, please. So we mapped all these, including some possible actions to generate co-benefits linked to the relevant articles of the convention, and provided some possible joint indicators to be used both on the side of the Minamata Convention and by parties, if they so wish, to track progress in these areas. Next slide, please. This was submitted to our COP5 last year and has supported the COP in taking a decision on mercury and the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The decision is longer. These are just some of the elements in the decision. where the COP welcomed the adoption of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, encouraged parties to integrate mercury action into projects under the GEF Biodiversity Focal Area and its integrated program. That was for GEF 8, and through the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. It invited the COP to the CBD to consider additional indicators under Target 7 to cover highly hazardous chemicals and mercury. It also invited parties, so the Minamata parties, to reflect national mercury reduction control targets in their revised and updated NBSAPs that will be aligned with the GBF. And to promote research on the impacts of mercury on biodiversity, share experience, and disseminate information. The COP also requested us, the Secretariat, to prepare a draft roadmap to support parties in maximizing the co-benefits arising from the implementation of the Minamata Convention and the GBF. And these will be considered at the next COP next year, that's COP 6. We are preparing this draft roadmap now. Next slide, please. Just a couple of slides showing our publications with links if you wish to consider. This is in French, but it's also available in English and Spanish. This is the link. I provide other links also for the English version and Spanish version when I share this presentation. Next slide. This is another publication that we had. This is on the socioeconomic impacts of mercury pollution, fisheries, and livelihoods, and explaining how mercury pollution disrupts ecosystem functions and services. One of the main ones is the provision of food, and it affects everyone who relies on fish for their dietary needs. Next slide, please. Finally, another publication, this is a draft, but it's in the process of being typeset and published. It's about monitoring of mercury and mercury compounds in and around artisanal and small-scale gold mining sites. As mentioned before, artisanal and small-scale gold mining is the main source, anthropogenic source of mercury entering the environment, and it causes a lot of destruction locally, but as well as globally through the long-range transport of mercury. With that, I think that was my last slide. Thank you. Yes, indeed. I would like now to change my hat and become moderator again and invite, please, Diane Climie from the UNEP Law Division to say a few words. And thank you again, Kono, for your presentation. Diane, please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela, and welcome colleagues, MEA focal points from BRS and Minamata. I'm very pleased to present a overview about the Bern process and the Bern cooperation process among multilateral environmental agreements for the effective implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide, please. So this framework, this transformative framework, which really visibly integrated multilateral environmental agreements and showed that solutions for biodiversity do not lie only in the biodiversity family of MEAs, but also in those from other clusters, including the pollution cluster, climate change, and and desertification. And transition pathways to change require that we collaborate with those stakeholders from outside the biodiversity bubble. One of the package decisions, 6 package decisions for the implementation of the framework is the decision 1513 on cooperation with other conventions and international organizations, which requested MEAs and UNEP to align with the GBF, just like the parties of the CBD towards its effective implementation. Next, please. So in the next phase, UNEP, because of its mandate, it has a mandate to facilitate cooperation and synergies among MEAs within many clusters, built on Bern 1 and Bern 2, which were consultative processes for the development of the GBF, and invited 16 MEAs, secretariats and their party representatives, as well as stakeholders from women, indigenous people, business, subnational governments, but also within clusters from biodiversity-related conventions like CITES, CMS, and CBD, plus the chemicals and waste, BRS, Minamata, and the Rio conventions like climate change and UN CCD. And this was a very effective way of discussing how to implement the GBF in a very effective way. And it was an opportunity with a platform that encouraged more in-depth discussions on the framework itself, but how to effectively deliver it within their respective mandates. Next. Please. So after the Bern 3 conference and the outcomes that came out, the report was shared with several multilateral environmental agreements and governing bodies like SBI, the Subsidiary Body on Implementation, as an information document, but also to the UNEA, United Nations Environment Assembly, 6th session, which was held in February, which further adopted resolutions to support the Bern process and enhance collaboration and cooperation, both for the implementation of the framework, but also for other parallel frameworks like chemicals and waste. And Minamata and BRS were very active at UNEA and provided valuable contributions to the Bern process, but also to UNEA and SBI and SEPSTA, where they were very active. Next, please. So one of the key things that happened at Bern 3, the conference that took place in January in Switzerland, where with the 16 MEAs, was an exercise on mapping their targets and strategies and targets with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but to show the entry points for cooperation and collaboration at multiple levels. So this paper is online, and it includes several annexes and entry points and entry points for cooperation at multiple levels on, for example, coalescing around targets, where you see, for example, on target 3 on protected areas, several MEAs can contribute as partners, collaborate in partnerships or as custodians to deliver on these specific targets. For example, on target 7 on pollution, heavily the contribution from BRS and Minamata is visible, but not only on that one, as showed by Manuela, other targets like 11, 15 on mainstreaming, on gender, delivering the gender plan of action, working with indigenous peoples as well. So it shows how working together can really deliver more effectively on this framework. Next, please. So what were the key practical actions that were concluded at the Bern 3 conference? First of all, it was really a community where it brought the chemicals and waste family closer to the GBF in cooperation, but not only with the CBD, which was a partner in the Bern 3 conference, of course, in collaboration with the Swiss government and Mexico and Sweden, who were the co-chairs, but also to show that collaboration has to happen horizontally with other conventions like CITES, CMS, the UNCCD. And there were a number of practical solutions that were presented at the global, regional, and national level. I am highlighting in this slide, there are many things, of course, but the practical ones in orange, which are the most urgent ones for the Rio COPs. For example, this is the year of the Rio COPs, and there's a lot of work that can be done by the parties that are participating or attending the 3 COPs, taking advantage of events that are taking place to have a common message between the 3 Rio COPs. Also taking advantage of outreach activities that are happening on synergies, on thematic days. And I will show in my next slide what are those days because thematic days also can contribute to collaboration on restoration, for example, on food systems, and can deliver something more coherent and a more coordinated message. Also, at the national level, establishing platforms that can trigger or keep the Bern spirit alive at the national level among MEA focal points of the multiple MEAs, especially while countries, the CBD parties are updating their MBSAPs and aligning them with the GBF, as well as with the NDCs and the NAPs. And this is an opportunity also to integrate the commitments from other MEAs collaborating. And that's what we are doing in UNEP with the DART workshops, the data reporting tool, which bring multiple MEAs to discuss data. Also, one of the things that were concluded that there is great potential for individual MEAs, and especially in thematic clusters like pollution, to deliver on as custodians or champions to those targets in partnership. And this was one of the key outcomes that came out from the Bern conference. Also, national leaders have a role to champion the intercluster synergies between biodiversity and pollution, and a chance at these COPs really to deliver a message, but also to deliver consistent decisions, supporting decisions at the 3 COPs, because they all discuss cooperation and collaboration, as well as in other MEAs. Next, please. Finally, I just wanted to say that preparations for COP16, those who are participating, just as mentioned by Manuela, the agenda items that are really primordial for attention by other MEAs are the progress on the targets and updating MBSAPs, cooperation with other conventions, mechanisms for planning, monitoring, and review, item 10, where the roles of MEAs will be discussed on their role of how they will play a role in the review of implementation and the global stocktake. Also on capacity building, scientific cooperation, and knowledge management, very key for attending those COPs. But also, please contact us if you are also going to be there to participate in the thematic day on cooperation. There will be other thematic days like restoration, health, as well as other Rio COPs. And UNEP has been tasked with the EMG to organize the Cooperation Day on the 31st of October. And we invite you really to participate actively in on this day, but also on other days, because on other days also partnerships are discussed, and coalitions and joint statements will also lead to a consistent final day at the Cooperation Day. So thank you very much, Manuela, for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. It's really nice to see how far the Bern process has come. I remember Bern 1 and 2 were mostly within the biodiversity cluster, and now Bern 3 has really expanded to include other players, including the chemicals and waste cluster MEAs. Thank you so much for all the effort, and we look forward to Bern 4. So we have come to the end of our presentations. I would like now to invite, there have been a number of questions in the chat, but you're very welcome who has asked questions in the chat or who would like to ask other questions to take the floor to pose your questions or to provide a comment on, and this can be either on national implementation of Target 7 or other targets, or more direct questions to any of the speakers. Please, if you would like to comment. I also see one question from Jean-Louis Mpo, the National Focal Point for the Basel Convention from DRC. What are the major impacts on chemicals and waste on biodiversity? We probably don't have time to go through the number of impacts that have been so far unveiled but they are many. They affect many of the taxa, of the animal taxa that have been studied. It affects keystone species that are very important for ecosystem services and functions. In the case of mercury, but also POPs, it affects top predators and so on. I will put, John, 2 publications in the chat, the link to 2 publications where you can see much more details about the impacts. And please, if there are any other questions. And there was also a question from Suki in the chat, and it was related to these additional indicators that may be considered. It's all, Kieran, I see your hand up. I think you can address this question or other questions much better than I could. So I'll pass it on to you, please.
Thank you, and actually, I mean, just to complement the information that you've already put in the chat, Manuela. So yeah, if you have a look at what is currently in recommendation 26.1, which will then go to the COP to be further discussed, there's a number of paragraphs that are currently in brackets, and those paragraphs are addressing issues related to the further development or review of the monitoring framework. So there's a sense, or some countries are suggesting or raising the idea that there should be some sort of review process and a way to bring in additional indicators. Some parties are perhaps a bit less enthusiastic about that approach and are instead thinking of other things. So we don't quite know exactly what's going to happen. It's obviously a decision for the COP. So there is a potential for additional indicators to potentially be brought in. However, as I said, those things are still really being discussed. So we'll just have to see what happens at COP, because ultimately it's a decision for parties to make. Also, I mean, just to note, I think you know, the indicators, because they are a core component of the reporting process. So the next national reports to the convention, there are kind of knock-on effects, and I think obviously then this issue ties into other discussions that are going to be happening at COP 15. COPs, yeah, sorry, at our next COP regarding planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. And then maybe just quickly, while I have the floor on the issue of highly hazardous chemicals, there is no definition of highly hazardous chemicals under the CBD. From the discussions so far, there's no intention, at least as of now, to develop such a definition. So it would really be up to parties in setting their national targets and going through their national biodiversity strategies and action plans to identify for them, given their national circumstances and priorities, what would actually constitute a highly hazardous chemical. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. We have a comment from Amsalu Tizalsu, as thanking for the timely convening of this event, and that more in-person lecture is required. I agree with you. I wish we could do this more often, and certainly in person. Unfortunately, there are cost implications, but we are trying to work on that, and we will, together with the CBD Secretariat, with the BRS Secretariat and all the players, try to, and certainly UNEP is doing this as well, try to bring together countries and other stakeholders to discuss in person. So as we are approaching, any of the panelists, please, if you want to add something, just jump in. If not, just wanted to mention also, we will post the presentations in the website. My colleague Sharifu is going to put the link to the website for this event again in the chat. There will be, in my presentation, you will see at the end that the recommendations to COP16 that are still in square brackets and highlighting only those that are relevant to chemicals and waste, or most relevant to chemicals and waste. And this provides an opportunity for those who wish to coordinate nationally before COP16. COP16 is just around the corner, just a little over a month from now. So we hope that these can still provide you with some support for national coordination. There is a question about from Suki from Japan. How solid has the reporting mechanism been established in the CBD? Perhaps, Kiran, this is another question for you. Will the first time under the GBF therefore foreseen the challenges?
Yes, I mean, it's quite a big question. So I think in the interest of time, I would just invite you to take a look at the documents that are being prepared or that will be discussed at COP, because there's quite a lot of issues to unpack. But in brief, what has been agreed is that there'll be this sort of multi-dimensional approach to reviewing implementation, and that approach will take into account different things. So national reporting, obviously, indicators. There's also ongoing discussions under the CBD that will be further continued at the upcoming COP on, you know, what types of reporting or like global reporting will be undertaken, what type of opportunities there will be for countries to have discussions amongst themselves to share information. So I would say that if you have a look at both Decision 15.6, which was adopted at COP, that sets out some of these mechanisms, and then what is on the discussion table for the upcoming COP, you'll get a good sense of what the mechanisms are where they've already been agreed, and then what issues are still being worked out. So there's a lot there to sort of unpack and do it justice in the 3 minutes or so that we have. But this will be a big part of the discussion at this upcoming COP, is to really further solidify this whole monitoring framework. With regards to challenges, I mean, I think there are many, but I think some of the big issues are really just looking at the logistics of it all and the timing of it all, and how, you know, the timeline for national reporting fits in with meetings of the COP and how all these different things interconnect. So these are some of the issues that parties are really going to be discussing at the upcoming meeting. Thank you. I'll stop there. I recognize we're running out of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Kiran. Yes, the challenge is to unpack so much information in the short time we have. Just to mention the next, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kiran, the next CBD national reports are due at the beginning of 2026. And then there will be another reporting cycle before 2030, when the new target or new targets may be adopted for the remaining period of implementation of the GBF. So definitely several challenges, but very important things to keep in mind and to keep track from the biodiversity side. So just to reiterate, we are approaching the end. We will share the recording of this event, as well as all the presentations and other materials with links to all the documents that we mentioned. So I would like to close by thanking all the presenters, all the participants. We heard a number of comments, and I've acknowledged some of you, but there are others also, thanking everyone who made this possible today. Also my colleague Sharifu, who's been behind the scenes, and other colleagues in the Minamata Secretariat, as well as BRS Secretariats, who are always working behind the scenes. Thank you. Thank you all panelists for taking the time and preparing these presentations. And thank you to all the participants. We hope this was useful. We hope to continue and to strengthen more and more the connections and the contribution of the chemicals and waste conventions to the global biodiversity framework and to biodiversity in general. Thank you very much to all. Stay safe and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Manuela.